Hello, I'm Helen Bradley. Welcome to this video tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use curves in Photoshop to adjust a photo. In this video tutorial, we're going to look at the curves adjustment in Photoshop. So I'm going to assume that you've just never seen curves before, but that you're interested in how you can adjust an image using the curves adjustment, because that's really where the power is in fixing images in Photoshop. So this is one of the images that we're going to fix. This is how it looked out of the camera, and we're going to add a couple of curves adjustment layers to just craft the image a little bit better. And this is another image. This is how it came out of the camera, and we're going to add some curves adjustments to this as well. And we're doing multiple curves adjustments because each one of these allows us to do something a little bit different in the image. So let's go back to the first photo. I'm just going to grab these two layers here, and I'm just going to get rid of them. So we're back to the original image, and we're going to start by adding a curves adjustment layer. So I'm going to choose Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves. Now the reason why I'm using a curves adjustment layer and not curves, which you can get to by choosing Image Adjustments Curves, is that this is going to be editable. Adjustment layers are layers in the image that you can turn off, you can delete, or you can edit. If we were to apply an adjustment direct to the image, then we wouldn't be able to come along later on and tweak it in any way. So it's best to use the curves adjustment layer, particularly when you're beginning. Now the curves adjustment dialog is a little bit confusing when you first see it, so let's see what it is that we're seeing here. Well, you'll always see this diagonal line through the curves adjustment, and that is a sort of neutral image. That's no change to the image. This is the dark side of the image, and this is the light side of the image, and you're seeing a histogram here. So the histogram is telling us about the pixels in the image. It's telling us we've got a lot of dark pixels. So there are a lot of darker pixels in this image. It's also telling us that we have no pure white pixels. So there's no part of the chart that actually reaches all the way to this end of the wall, if you like, of the curves dialog. So that's telling us we don't have any pure white pixels, but everything is sort of from around 25% gray through to black. And if we have a look at the image, that's pretty much it too. We're just not seeing any white. Even the things that perhaps should be white are really just gray. So this is the dark side, this is the light side. So there are a couple of ways that you can adjust the histogram using this curves dialog, because that's in fact what we're doing. And one of them is that you can use these little triangles here. Now I'm going to do something that we wouldn't normally do, and that is drag in on this one. The reason why we wouldn't drag in on this one is that we've already got some dark pixels in the image, and so we don't want to make them any darker, because by dragging inwards, that's exactly what we're doing. We're making the darkest pixels even darker. Now if you hold the Alt or Option key as you click on this, you'll see a little overlay that's telling you when those pixels are going to black. So you can see that very closely to this very edge here, you can see that the input value is 2 here, and we're starting to see some colored pixels there. When I take it back to 0, there are still some colored pixels. So we've actually got some blacks in this image. Now on this end, we could bring this in, because when I hold the Alt or Option key and drag on this, this is going to start showing us where the pixels are going to pure white. You can see that we can come in quite a ways here, quite a few steps in this area. So I'm looking at the input value here of around 243, 242 is the first point at which we're seeing some white pixels, and they are up here in the image. Let's just show that to you again. You probably just start seeing those pixels come through. I'm just picking them up again now. So I'm going to take this out until those pixels all but disappear. And so now we've got some real whites in the image. So if I click here on this eyeball, this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like afterwards. The image is a little bit lighter. But that's not all that we can do, because we have this line here. And what we can do is we can drag on it to change the darkness or lightness of pixels in a range in the image. This is the darks, this is the lights. And if I drag upwards on the lights, you'll find that the lighter areas of the image here are becoming lighter still. And if I was to drag downwards, you'd find that the lighter areas of the image are becoming dark. Now I'm doing this to a much larger degree than you would do, just so that you can see that dragging down is making things darker and dragging upwards is making things lighter. And we can drag anywhere on the curve. So this is making the mid-tones and the sort of 75% dark pixels much lighter. Dragging down here is making everything a lot darker. Now I'm just going to grab this little marker on the curves line and just drag it away because I don't want it there. Now let's go and select on this tool here, which is an on image adjustment tool, and I'm just holding my mouse over the image. I'm not actually clicking, but you'll see that as I'm moving my mouse over the image, a little marker is moving here over this line. And what it's doing is it's telling me where these pixels fall in the tonal range of the image. So if I hold my mouse pointer over here, then the pixels in that area were around here in the image. Down here, they're going to be in the darker area of the image, and up here, they're going to be in the lightest area of the image. Now, if we, for example, wanted to edit the darkest pixels in the image, I could hold my mouse pointer over this area so that I can see exactly where it is. And if I control click, I'm actually going to set a marker on the curves line at this point. So that's helping me identify exactly where those pixels are on this line. And if I drag downwards here, then I'm going to darken those pixels. But you can see that I've also darkened everything else. So let's see if we can do a little bit better than that. I'm going to again hold my mouse pointer over this area and control click to just add a point onto the curve. But we saw before when we dragged the curve down that we took the whole line with us. Well, let's consider what would happen if we actually pinned the line down. So I'm just clicking on this curve line in a few places here just to pin it down so it's not going to move. Now when I drag downwards here, you can see that it's not affecting the rest of the line. And so I'm darkening these pixels but not changing the rest of the image. Let's turn it on and off, and you can see that this area is becoming much darker. And I can make it darker still. Off and then on again. So we're changing the look of the image by just dragging on the curve. Now if we're happy with the bottom of the image at this point, I could just save that. So I could just close that away, and I can add another curves adjustment layer, and then I could adjust another part of the image using a different curves adjustment layer. Let's have a look at this area up here because I'm really interested in the sky. So I'm just going to control click here to pin this sky point in position. So now I'm going to pin the rest of the line down so it's not going to move. Now let's look and see what happens if I darken the sky. Now I'm going to show you what you shouldn't do with the curves line, and that is this. When this line becomes sort of flat, you'll find that all the pixels go to a sort of, well, in this case, mid-gray. But if the line were flatter elsewhere, then they would go to a different color gray. So here they would go to a sort of 25% gray because the line is flat across this portion of the curve. So you don't want to make your line at any point go flat, and you certainly don't want it to go sort of like a roller coaster, because in that case you're inverting the colors in the image, and you can see that they've all changed color in this area. So in the lighter areas of the image, everything's changed color. And unless you want that sort of result, then you wouldn't generally drag your curve line either flat or below the point at which it has been previously. But we can drag it down a little bit at this point just to darken those pixels if we want to. You will find that at any point where the line is sort of flattened out, that you lose contrast. That's something that curves gives us, is contrast or flattened contrast. And when the line is flatter, we're losing contrast. Where it's steeper, we're actually gaining contrast. So right now we've got more contrast in the very, very lightest pixels in the image, and in this area here we've got flattened contrast. So we may or may not want that, but that's what we're getting when we drag down here we're actually, because we're making this line here flatter, we're getting less contrast in this area. Let's just take it back up and you can see how much more contrasty that is. Now, in addition to this RGB curve line, we also have color channels here. So we've got the red channel, we've got the green channel, and the blue channel. And now each of these has opposites. So this red channel here, this curve line, controls not only red in the image, but also its opposite, which is cyan. So we can adjust the colors in the image by adding more red or adding more cyan by adjusting the red curve. For the green curve, we're looking at green and magenta, up for green, down for magenta. And then for the blue channel, we're looking at blue and yellow, up for blue, down for yellow. So these are colors that we can affect in the image using curves here. So for example, if we wanted to make the sky a little bit yellower, I'm actually going to peg down the curve line here so it's not going to move in the darker areas of the image, but let's take the lighter areas of the image a little bit more towards yellow to make the sky look a little bit sort of more thunderstormy. Before and after, we've added more yellow into the lighter areas of the image. Let's go to the red channel and let's have a look at perhaps adding a bit of red into that as well. I'm going to peg down my curve or pin down my curve by clicking a couple of times in the area that I don't want to affect, which is these darker pixels here, and then I'm going to the lighter pixels and I'm just going to add a little bit of red into them. Off and on, and you can see that there's a little bit more of a red tinge in those pixels. Let's come back to the curves adjustment. Let's add yet another curves adjustment to this image. Layer, new adjustment layer, curves. This time let's increase the contrast across the middle of the image. Now there's a typical curve adjustment that you can make that increases contrast, and it's called an S curve. And what you do to create your S curve is you're going to drag upwards on the lighter areas of the image and downwards on the darker areas of the image. Now I'm just going to do this to extremes so that you can see. This is a flatter line, so there's less contrast in the very light areas of the image and less contrast in the very dark areas. But see, around 75% and 25% in this middle tonal range area, we've got a steeper curve, and that's giving us more contrast. Less contrast, more contrast. Less, more. So we're seeing a definite crisping up of the middle of the image. Now, as I said, that's probably too much, so you'll want to back that off. But a standard S curve like this is the kind of curves adjustment that you could perform on nearly all of your images if you want to just give it a little bit more crispness in the mid-tones. Now, as we were working, something's happened to these flowers over here, and I'm just going to look and see which is the curves adjustment that is responsible for those flowers. And I think that they're all pretty much contributing here. So if I was a little bit concerned about the overly red flowers here, I would go and get the brush tool and I would go and get black paint. I'm just going to make sure that I have a nice soft brush here, which I do, a nice soft brush. And I'm going to click on the layer mask for these curves adjustment layers. I'm just going to paint out over these flowers, and I probably only need to do it on one or two of these layers just to bring back the red if I'm not happy with an overly red effect in those flowers. So what I've done there is I've just painted in black on the mask so that we're removing the adjustment so far as it is affecting just these flowers here. Now you can also use other things on the mask. So for example, you could use a gradient. So let's actually go and put a gradient into this mask here. Let's see what it's controlling first of all. Well, it's the mid-tone contrast one. So let's actually just make a slightly more intense mid-tone contrast so that we'll be able to see the result when we add a gradient to this mask. I'm going to grab here my black to white gradient, which is this one here. Now black is going to remove the effect and white is going to apply it or make sure that it's applied. So I'm just going to drag on this. I'm going to drag downwards, clicking on the mask to make sure I'm selecting it, and just drag downwards and just see what that's going to do. So what I've done is I've actually removed the effect on the top of the image and applied it only to the bottom. Now that's not what I want, so let's go the other way. Now this is much better. We've got the increased mid-tone contrast across the middle of the image, and we could actually get a bit more if we wanted to by just making this a shallower gradient. So it's being removed from this area of the image but applied across the middle of the image. And because we've lost our effect on the flower here, well, I can just go and paint that in over the top. So now we've seen how we can use curves adjustment on this image. Let's have a look at this one. This one has some really obvious light and dark areas, and so we're probably going to want to adjust these separately using curves. I'm going to start with a new curves adjustment layer, layer, new adjustment layer, curves. And this time I'm going to adjust for this darker area of the image. So I'm just going to pull up on this curve line, because what I'm looking for is to add some lightness in this area but also increase the contrast. So I'm just going to move this over. What I'm concerned about is that I don't lose detail on the plane here, so I don't want to blow that out, but I do want to ensure that I get a lightening here. So I might pin the line down here and then drag upwards on it a little bit more, so that we're lightening this area of the image. But the upshot of that is that we've killed some of the sky. So the best way of solving that is to go to this layer mask here and adjust it by using a gradient. So I have my gradient here. I've got the same black to white gradient as I had earlier. Just going to drag to see which way it is dragging so I know which way I'm working. Well, it's dragging correctly. It's black at the top and white at the bottom. So I just want to make sure that the tipping point or the change between the black and the white is fairly short, and I want it to be across the top of this building. So I'm just testing it here now and just making sure that I'm not losing too much across the top of the building. And it is actually pretty good there. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm getting a lightening of the plane, but I'm not losing this detail in the sky. I'm going to add a new adjustment layer, a new curves adjustment layer, and just see what we can do with the sky. The sky is in the lighter areas, because if I test the sky here, you can see most of these pixels are in the lighter area of the image. So what I'm going to do is just pin this curve line down so it's not going to move in the darker areas of the image. So when I pull on this end of the curve, nothing's going to move here. And what I want to do, I think, is to actually lighten this sky, because in doing so, you can see that this line is steeper, and so that's adding more contrast, more sharpness and sort of mid-tone contrast through that sky area. So this is the before, a little bit flat. This is the after, a lot more colorful and a lot more crisp. Now if I wanted to, I could also add another curves adjustment and have a look at the blue color that we've got down here. The sky is very warm. It's in that sort of orange yellow sort of tone, but down here everything's really blue. A curves adjustment layer will allow us to deal with that. So again, another curves adjustment layer, but in this case I'm going to look at my color channels. I'm going to look at my red and my blue, because that's where the colors are. In the red channel is my red, so if I drag upwards I'm going to get some red. Okay, so I don't want that. What I want is some red in the darker areas of the image, so I'm going to fix the top part of the curve line and just drag upwards just a little bit on the red, just to warm up the bottom of the image. So that's the before. See how it's a little bit bluey green almost, and here's the after. It's got a little bit more red in it. Let's go to the green channel. Well, here we can go and click to fix the lighter areas so that we don't pull these areas of the curve when we adjust this area. And we don't want green, we want to move away from green, so we're going to drag down towards magenta. That's adding a little bit of magenta into the image. before, after. And now let's go to the blue channel. Again, we don't want to affect the lighter areas of the image. We want to fix those, and we want to drag away from blue towards yellow. Again, warming up the front area of this image, before, after. So there are our curves adjustments for this image. We've lightened the bottom of the image. We've brought back some contrast and detail into the sky, and then finally we've warmed up the bottom part of the image, the area of the image that was a little bit cold. So there's how you can use the curves adjustment layers to edit your photos. You just want to have a look at the photo and see what it needs, and then apply curves adjustments to give the image what it needs, some additional contrast, a little bit of lightness, and perhaps adjust the color in the image using curves as well. I'm Helen Bradley. Thank you for joining me for this video tutorial. Look out for more video tutorials here on my YouTube channel, and consider subscribing to my channel and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. And visit my website at projectwoman.com, where you'll find more tips, tricks and tutorials on a range of applications, including Photoshop, Lightroom, Illustrator and a whole lot more.